A short meditation on the saying this Oxbridge saying that we owe to Frank Ramsey, that the chief proposition of philosophy is that philosophy is nonsense, and that this disposition to do philosophy must be checked, but that therefore um, we must learn how to discern the boundary between sense and nonsense. The horizon in which this question appears is the questioning on the use of formal propositions, especially by John Austin. Um, One of the there's the little book by Austin on how to do things with the words, on the first theory of the efficacious speech, or the speech act theory. But there's also a nice lecture on it where you can hear him speak on some of the issues. But the thesis taken in a very general way in toto strikes me as it sort of etiologizes the whole analytic thing. So far as analytic philosophy be allowed to somehow be the name of a racial uh, category, a kind of genus. There's this group, and they continuously take it for granted that this language game, or this center of gravity, is what philosophy is about. And then if you try to locate what they're doing, various statements appear. One would be something along the lines of we're attempting to say things which bring clarity to the life of British people. And one of them, so for example, one of them could be that even if there is no substance or no object called time, nonetheless, there's calcium, and there's objects that cast shadows, and we can study these as though there were some region called time which were affecting them, and this might be helpful to us even if it's not true. So then they formulate this theory that you could go beyond their notion of scientific objects as hemoglobin, or anything that could cast a shadow and exist in the sense of a solid object casting a shadow, and then these other things like time, which might be just for our philosophic purposes, but not for not properly scientific purposes. We could posit as existing without becoming nonsensical, for the reason that it could be of some help to think that way. Um, and then this whole attitude, it strikes me, um, it's a very racist attitude, because it always assumes the British stupidity is the starting point, and then British philosophizing is the other side, and they're constantly making this remark, which I find opaque and has no real sense, that if we're just living our lives, there's one thing that we're doing, but if we're philosophizing, there's another thing. And then supposedly Wittgenstein is celebrated on the basis that, unlike the standard professoriate, like the hundreds of thousands of professors, Wittgenstein lives a philosophic life just in his banal daily life, and therefore he's very celebrated for that. But Wittgenstein himself is constantly making this remark, which, however, one might interpret somewhat ironically that if I'm just being a Britishman, so it sort of like sounds like Ionesco in the Bald Sopranos. Ionesco's supposedly, because he was learning English, British English, it called his attention to many simple facts of grammar, which he was otherwise unaware of, although he was already had several languages, French and Romanian, and maybe some other languages. But maybe it's something particularly stupid about the English. So I've noticed this also in the sort of Nick Land thing. Nick Land was especially recalcitrant to intelligence, especially not open to it. And then I started watching the beginning of this. He's a sort of current day German guy, but not a Prussian. So not a Prussian, but just a German who's as a Muttersprache as German. Niederhauser, I think his name, Johannes Niederhauser. And his whole attitude is totally analytic philosophy attitude. So I think this is true, that analytic philosophy totally dominates in present-day Germany as much as in Oxbridge. And the simple attitude was, we don't really understand what you're saying, Mr. Dugin, therefore you're a moron. This is the British, this is the appallingly imbecile attitude of analytic philosophy. And I think it's sort of has this heavy sentence. So I tried to locate the essence of it, and I think that the essence seems to be partially in this notion of common sense, which Trump has been using as a slogan, and it's just sort of a dodge in order to, let's not be complex. Let's not say anything. Let's fly as far as we can from complexity. Let's be as blasé as possible and just say the things that are immediately by mechanical, robotic, conditioned response, everybody already understands. Let's bring everybody into the technological essence as much as possible and make them as much like analytic philosophers as possible, like this horrible... Nick Land, I thought, yeah, he's uneducated and he's unable to respond to Dugin, but I thought maybe he does have some native intelligence where it's mostly a matter of ignorance, like he could be primed to it. That was my impression. He's just ignorant of what they call in the continental tradition, they call the historical consciousness. And this basically corresponds to the rise of anthropology and the rise of the anthropology which gives up the notion that there's simply a hierarchy from what in economics got to be called the underdeveloped and the developed countries, but which before that was thematized in various ways as the barbarians and the civilized and things of those natures. So Dugin has given some good seminar lectures on that. And unfortunately, I think most of his lectures are in Russian. So apparently he's given a large number of lectures on the nature of time, which are, I don't know if they're available. That would be very interesting. But this is interesting to put this Wittgenstein. I think Wittgenstein has to be read sort of, it's ridiculous in a way when you read these anecdotes of how Wittgenstein came to prominence. So it's like there's a few guys around Oxbridge, and then in a later generation you see that with a dullard like John Searle gets in with him, and it's sort of like, oh, this guy, we kind of enjoy talking to him. What he says is sort of doesn't appeal to us, but okay, he's kind of good company. So this is how he comes to prominence, basically. And in the case of Wittgenstein, I think almost nobody in analytic philosophy has much interest in what he's saying. Um, uh, and they try to dismiss it as sort of just a excessive focus on language. Um, that being said, I think, in polls they often put Wittgenstein near the top, but I feel as though it were only because of some guy like Nick Land or whatever, this Niederhauser guy or whatever. Yeah, they'll take an interest in Wittgenstein, but it won't. Essentially, they won't be talking about the same thing he's talking about. That's would be my contention. Essentially, it's for some other reason. So let's. All right, I guess starting with that, I'll try to. Yeah, I think this is of extreme importance, though. It's supposed people sort of complain, why should you talk about the current day things, like the opening of the war? But I think it's directly connected to this new homage, as Dugin is thematizing it, is this sense that again, it's like, oh, we don't understand you, therefore you must be an idiot. This sort of hubris, or sort of to put it in a comic way, but it's really worse than hubris. I think it's just a sort of ignorance in this full sense of not noticing the thing, not being receptive to it, and then taking that as a ground of superiority, like in a Trumpian sense. I think with Trump, I don't know if Trump even does that. It's like Trump just sort of stands there, and then people like Bannon come in and direct things. I think Bannon, again, we could say do the same thing to Bannon. So we could say, oh, Bannon is just a gangster, as Cornel West says. But I think Bannon has, if you attune to what he's saying, then you see he has some ideas that are of some considerable interest for the same problems that leftists have with the so-called empire, with the state, with the with the powers of corporations being too great. And so Bannon tries to address those issues, but through, I think, a non-political means. I think he tries to do it through quasi-legal, and if not to say, by skirting right at the edge of the legal possibility, and then sort of with a ethos of trying to avoid violence as much as possible, and trying to use the possibilities of the system in the way I was just detailing in a couple podcasts, as it were, before this, about the legal situation. There's plenty of, for instance, the Mike Pence and J.D. Vance thing about the Electoral College votes either being accepted or not accepted, and so on. Ultimately, it strikes me that, I guess I'll go more into some Wittgenstein a little bit, I think, just to see how much is Wittgenstein free and genuinely engaged at the level, in the way Heidegger is, and how much is he giving too much ground to Oxbridge, and where is my claim is that the place where this gets gravity in order to make the decision is in a theory of personality, and that's the only place where we could find a gravity that all thinking beings could, in some way, say this is a ground out of which we could find a stable and abiding center for existence. And then there's a number of questions of how to distinguish person. I mean, in one, there's the personality as understood as evacuated from the German universities in the 19th century, according to the pantheismist right, which is personality understood as intelligence and will, in sort of a remainder of the Catholic theory, which was evacuated by Descartes and Spinoza. But personality taken more widely, we see in the Archaic period in Greece as the center of the thinking of the epic sagas of the song culture. And I mean the Iliad was sung by rhapsodes and so on. And so I think that's the project is let's snatch up this imbecile English culture, which is so arrogant, and at the same time the intelligent German culture. In a certain sense, these are two sides of the so-called Teutonic culture, as they were put in one, which is one of the three parts of the Europeans, along with the Latin part and the Slavic part. But they can't simply remain in the vortex. They have to have a ground which connects them to the question of personality, in the sense that Socrates is a personality and Christ is a personality which is meant to present something greater than Socrates, where Socrates was the phronimos, was supposed to have phronesis, or the direct sense of what to do in any situation in a trustworthy way, through his education, which was on a friendly basis with the Athenians. In other words, he could talk to them directly. If they gave him enough time, he could convince them. And then the break into the Catholic time, where Christ is presented as the super personality, or theos. But I think, within this tradition, there could be found a ground. And one of the problems is the analysis of grammar as presented, or the analysis of what is language and how does it connect to any scientific project, as presented by Wittgenstein, which I claim is homologous and covers the same subject matter as Heidegger.